You're watching the Juice Podcast. I'm Carson Poppenger. We have Brett Evanson today, and also our guest we're welcoming back, Vince Romney, our cybersecurity expert. He's a cybersecurity executive, and he is the partner and executive on the team at Digital Defense Security. And they've actually advised our company Squeeze on cybersecurity issues and helping us with making sure that we're upgrading our security posture. He also has a book coming out that we're going to talk about on today's episode called How to Not Suck at Cybersecurity. So we're happy to have Vince with us today.
Great to be back. Enjoy it.
Yeah, you've been busy lately. Any new things that you've been working on or initiatives that you have?
Yeah, there's a lot going on right now. I just finished my first book, amazingly enough, and then we are working on some new software. So something that hopefully we'll be able to expose to you guys and see how that works out. But it's, the world of cyber never stops. And so I think unless you're always learning and always trying and investigating and growing in it, you get left behind really fast and become irrelevant. Like in my case, I can't help other people if I'm not growing and learning in the domains that other people are using. Brett and I were just talking about your what's the product called again?
Peel Voice.
Peel Voice, and kind of how that genesis happened and leveraging the AI engines to create that benefit to the clients. And, I know a lot of security guys have different opinions about AI. I'm certainly an embracer of the concept of technologies that enable, and AI is certainly an enabling technology, and it comes with the caveat, you got to at least know what it's doing. Brett totally impressed me because he said he'd already taken Andrew Ng's course on Udemy. And I was like, yes, nice. He dug in and learned. And I think that's what's so cool is there's opportunity to learn about stuff in the modern world. And you just go on Udemy and find the course and learn what it is, or any of these other locations.
I should call out most of it went over my head. But, doing that vector multiplication calculus level stuff, I may have been more comfortable doing that in college days. But
well, you definitely have to break out the old college calculus book to figure out what's being said in some cases.
What's the platform called?
Udemy, Udemy. It's one of the many learning platforms out there. It's not the only one.
I think it's on Coursera too, if you've heard of that one. It's a Stanford class that he basically just puts online. You can go audit it for free. But it's like vector multiplication that's like a precursor to AI and machine learning. It's pretty thick. But
he breaks down the whole structure of neural networks so that you can understand how the process of taking, in the case of language, take words and you break them down into components that are vectors. They're individual vectors that are embedded in this database. And then each one has a weight. And then each layer of that network, that neural network, processes that to determine the likelihood that in sequence you have a sentence becoming a structure. So, what follows the? Almost anything. And so each layer of that neural network tries to figure out what that next thing is. So the dog, now I've got some sequence, right? And there's a much higher probability that you can predict what comes after dog than after the. And so that depth of neural network breaks that down. And so it's very interesting stuff.
And Andrew Ng was the head of search or something for Google, and then he left Google to work for Baidu. And I'm not actually sure where he's at right now, but he's
the guy.
He's the guy. Yeah. So to get his course for free online is just unreal. And there's a lot of resources like that out there. To your point, you have to stay on top of learning, anything in the technology space. You have to always be learning what's the new thing coming out.
And in security, it's one of those elements where we know that any given tool is going to be leveraged by the threat actors. So we have to also, on the good side, figure out how we're going to leverage those tools and how we're going to make those effective so that we're at least on par, if not maybe hopefully a little ahead of the bad guys. But it's an arms race.
Have you seen AI directed attacks specifically in clients? Like, are there specific, tools or platforms or something that those are coming from? Or?
Well, so your old school botnets that used to just kind of go out and broadly hit ports to see if they have a response, right? And so you've got a whole herd of compromised machines or compromised devices. I mean, it can be everything from a light bulb to a PC that's compromised, and it's used to ping any given IP that shows up on the internet. So any internet protocol address shows up on the internet, and it says, Who are you? What do you do? What's open? What can I talk to? And if it comes back with a positive response, that goes back to the owners of the botnet, or whoever contracted with the botnet to do that work, and says, hey, I found the following ports at the following IPs that are open. You can interrogate those. And then they might launch another attack through that same botnet to then do some port sniffing and really find out what opens up and what can I talk to, what operating systems on the back end of that.
So from your perspective, it's not necessarily manifesting itself differently. It's just being smarter about it.
It's being smarter about it. The attacks, so you guys familiar with, I'm going to use the term here, sorry, MITRE attack framework. So MITRE is a government entity that, government contractor that has been largely responsible for much of the growth in the security side of DoD and industry in general. And they built what's called the attack framework, which is they've taken the TTPs, tactics, techniques, and protocols, I think is what the TTPs are. But those TTPs are documented, and there's only a few hundred of them. And that's every single attack follows one of those, one or more. But they follow those. And they haven't added to that in years because there's not really novel attacks. There's just smarter attacks.
So you were saying previously that when you were doing, I don't know, maybe we have to edit this out. You were saying when you were doing stuff in the Navy,
Air Force,
Air Force, that you never did like a technical attack. That most of it was
our
social.
team, at least in the activities we got involved in, we never really successfully did a technical attack hack where we hacked something technical.
Right.
We just figured out how to get somebody's credentials and log in, because it's much easier to farm someone's credentials somehow or identify a login page and know some email addresses associated with that account, and then just go grab a whole bunch of dump credentials. Because, you guys get these emails, we're sorry, your whole thing has been compromised. They got your email and your password and all these other things that you had with company X, and you get that apology letter. Well, that means that the bad guys now have more data. And so all you do is go take the email addresses and match it with everything in that big, vast database of compromised accounts. By the way, that used to be all independent, silos in the dark web. Some enterprising young man apparently went out and organized that into a searchable, indexable database.
Oh, how nice of him.
Yeah, so you can go check it out and go, oh yeah, I need potential passwords for these 3 email addresses. And you can source and pay your little Bitcoin slice and come back with the answer. And then you go in and you stuff those. And so you put the email in and then try one, try the next, try the next, try the next. And if those don't work, we're all lazy, right? Try one with 2023 and then try one with 2022. And then, just iterate on those existing passwords, because most people are lazy enough that they keep a core password and then they put, 1, 2, 3 at the end. Or
You're in my head, Vince. You gotta get out of my head. You've got my whole password strategy.
Yeah, that's
I need to log off right now and go fix some things.
Yeah, go fix some things. And that's the reality of how, we cannot keep 2,000 passwords in our head.
Yeah.
It's not a thing, right? Especially complex, sophisticated passwords. So you have to go back to that role of, well, how do I do this? Well, obviously password managers are great because they have the capability to, you remember one nice, long, complex password and everything else just auto feeds in. And they can set it up so that it rotates and you update your passwords annually and they're complex and they're long and you don't have to remember anything. The other is, and boy, somebody's going to crucify me for this, but a logbook, paper, pen logbook, if that's where you need to go, I'd much rather you write that down, because the odds of you getting burglarized for your passwords is much lower than if you've got that on some unprotected spreadsheet in your Google Drive.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
what about sticky notes under the keyboard?
Those I do have problems with, especially in an enterprise environment. Let's not go there. But, it's something that you control, right?
Yeah. It's interesting because, I was the password managers. You talked about password managers, and you hear about LastPass was they were compromised last year or something like that.
2 years ago. Yeah.
2 years ago, and I had an account there, and so it's like, what's safe? What do you do? Because maybe a logbook is honestly hey, full disclosure here, because you're not going to find it, but I have some core passwords that are very important. Some to my password manager, some to other things that are very, very important. Those are on paper in my safe. Yeah. Because again, odds are that's not going to be something that happens, and of course now I'm saying this on a podcast. So, all right, sorry guys. Well, I've heard of people, I won't say, I've heard of people that, have tens of thousands of files on like their Dropbox and things like that. And they may have like put those, do a backup to like a
hard drive.
to a hard drive.
Yeah.
Just throw it in their safe, and that's where they keep it. That way there's a backup of all their files. And
Well, and like estate planning purposes,
yeah.
If I died, I don't know if my wife would know half my passwords.
Yeah.
So if she could get into a book or my password manager, whatever, then she'd be fine, right?
Exactly. And that's the model. That's why I have the book, is so that any of my, my wife, my kids, whoever needs it, they have access to that.
Yeah. Then just updating
and
it.
they know the combination of the safe. So,
it
works out.
Yeah. There's always updates too that have to happen.
Sure.
And
Yeah,
making
100%.
Sure
And I think that's the value of a good password manager. And again, I had both a 1Pass and a 1Password and a not LifeLock, sorry. Who got hacked?
LastPass.
LastPass, man, the L was killing me. But the LastPass group, when they got hacked, I was like, well, I'll just move everything over and reset it. So I pushed everything over into 1Password and reset everything to new passwords. And it's fun because when you do that import, 1Password says, this came from LastPass. So you can identify which ones. You can sort by that and say, oh, I need to change that, change that, change that. So the technology is there to assist us and help us. Is it perfect? No, because again, it's technology. And the only 100% secure thing you can do is turn it off.
Yeah.
If you have an offline system that isn't on, that's secure.
Yeah.
Not useful, but secure.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting because these are things I think that are relevant to the marketers that are usually watch our podcast and things like that. I know you guys were talking about some really heavy technical stuff, MITRE or something or other. I can't remember. MITRE attack framework. And, but these are things that are, everyone's facing and everyone's dealing with. And so I think it's super relevant. And so what other things have you seen in the market that's out there, attacks in, I know other countries and things like that.
Yeah, there's certainly a ton going on. And, right now we've got almost what you'd consider a crucible going on in Ukraine with the cyber attacks that are continuing to evolve and get more and more sophisticated, more aggressive over the course of that war. I mean, it preceded, the land war was preceded by cyber attacks.
Are you saying originating from Ukraine? Or
No, as part
Ukraine?
as part of the Ukraine conflict, i.e. coming in from Russia against Ukraine, coming in from other sources against Ukraine, going out of Ukraine towards Russia. It's a cyber war as much as it is a ground war because both sides recognize that there is value in trying to take down the information systems, compromise those systems in some way, because that's how we communicate now. And, in the military, we long recognized that our dependence on technology meant we had to have ways to make technology resilient and make it functional even under attack. And I think that's one of those principles that I took out of the military into my work with other companies post that career was resiliency matters. You're never going to be 100%, right? You can't spend enough money to be 100% secure. And you have a business to run. So you've got to say, well, here's the slice I can actually allocate effectively to my cybersecurity program. What can I do with that slice of money to make it as effective as possible? And a big part of that for me is that resiliency. And we talk about that. How are you guys going to back up if something breaks? How do you respawn functionality? Well, one of the upsides is, you guys have a model that's uniquely robust because of how you've done your setup, right?
Sure.
But in your tools that you're building, how are you going to respawn those if somebody breaks them? Or even if they break on an operational mode. It's not even a cyber attack, it's just an operational failure and something breaks. How quickly can you get back?
And you're talking about just like snapshots of code and data.
And then the practice or the function that brings that back.
Yeah.
So one of the things a lot of people do is they build a very robust backup, but they've never actually tested taking that and turning it back into a production system. Yeah. And so they have it, and then they find out it takes them 12 days to bring that back into a production environment. That's not real effective.
Yeah.
So that's part of what any enterprise, or even down to the guy that's got a side gig, running an Etsy shop, right? Whatever that is, if you don't know how you're going to bring that back if it goes down, that's probably a consideration to maybe talk through and work through.
That's really relevant too, because I know there's been a number of mortgage companies that have faced those same attacks, and they encountered some of those similar challenges where it took days, if not weeks, to get everything 100% functional again. And so you've got to have that backup process, but then you have to be able to know that you can deploy it and rebuild your systems and be up and running so it doesn't interrupt business
Yeah,
that much.
the playbook model is what I like to call it. Is you've got something you can actually pull out and go, step one,
Yeah.
step two, step three, step four, and you've tested it, and you know that if I follow those steps, and I've taken care of my front end, that all that data is there and all the systems are there. You can respawn servers, you can put data back in there, you can respawn the website, bam, I'm up and running.
Yeah, 2 years ago, I was at the MGM for a conference in Vegas, and we went to check in, and we stayed at one of the hotels that was on the property, and they were under attack. They had that the ransomware, I think, that where it was the social engineering executive password was compromised over the phone, and their systems were all down. They basically purposely then took everything down so that they could figure out what was exposed. And I remember we were checking in, and they had no way to verify and check us in with the normal electronic process and everything. And they had to go through stacks of logs to check us in. Like, okay, what was your name? And they, there's thousands of hotel rooms there. And it's like they're looking through and it took about a half hour to get us checked in.
Did they have the credit card swiper that goes like back and forth?
The imprinter,
the
imprinter.
Yeah, no, that would have been funny though.
That's actually how I met my wife.
Yeah.
The credit card imprint machine. Back in the days when they used to do that.
Yeah.
She took my card and it was a pizza shop, and she asked for the phone number because they used to ask for your phone number.
Yeah.
And so I gave it to her, and as I walked away, she goes, "I have to remember that." And I went, "Excuse me? Maybe I got to go talk to that lady."
That's cool. That's an interesting story. Yeah. Where was that? Where was that at? That you met?
A place called Round Table Pizza.
Up Here in Utah?
Olympus Hills Mall. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's
my kids wouldn't even know what that is. Like,
no concept of an
carbon
imprint
copy.
machine. Yeah.
I did hear somebody describing that to someone recently, and I thought it was funny because I do remember those too. And there were times I worked at Target as I was going to school and things, and the systems would go down there.
Yeah.
And they had to bring out those carbon copy things to take cards, and then we had notepads. Even they were like, "Here, everybody have a notepad. Write down what it was," and we were.
Oh, wow.
Like we were having to do that because I think it was like a power outage where the systems were down and there was no power either. And so I think today, the decision there would be just to kind of close the store, is what would probably happen today. But it sort of, completely disrupts the whole business.
Well, there's this, I think every enterprise, every individual, to be honest with you, needs to kind of have at least some concept of what am I going to do if X happens? Mm-hmm. We were talking earlier about the concept of threat modeling. And threat modeling is something in security and software development is pretty commonly known and used. And it's just saying, if I'm going to build product A, what are all the things that could go wrong? Mm-hmm. What are the threats that I've got to compensate for as I build this product? And you look at that, and then you make the decision. You've identified all the threats. Now what's most realistic to happen? And then what's my dollars and cents risk? Mm-hmm. How much money am I going to spend to control for this? Because it all comes down to, even at the individual level, how much money am I going to spend versus how much risk am I willing to accept? Because we all have that equation. Mm-hmm. And as a business, you have to come up with that equation, right? Carson, you got to say, I'm willing to accept a certain amount of risk with the potential of the upside. Mm-hmm. And so you guys made, what I would consider a risk in saying, we're going to leverage AI to make this new product that's really got potential upside, right? Yeah. So you had to invest in it. That's a risk. Didn't know for sure it was going to work. That's a risk. And then as it evolves, you're like, okay, see, maybe that risk is paying off. And I think we all make those equations. In information security, that is a critical part of how I interact with companies. With leadership in any company, is like, that's one of the first questions we got to talk to you about is what's your risk ratio?
And if I remember right, I think we had sort of like a 3x3 matrix where you come up with a likelihood of something happening, either like a low, medium, high, and then a impact if it did happen, low, medium, high, and then start with your high quadrant, whatever, and then work down. So that's how we've approached it. Where you do a thorough assessment, and then you sort of know where to start on fixing things, or not fixing things, but
And you
know,
try to
plugging
build that
holes.
into a monetary argument. You say, okay, based on that, we're going to approximate or estimate that a loss is going to cost this much.
Sure.
And so it's that likelihood and that cost, that impact. Where's your threshold? Well, if you're running a company and, for argument's sake, you make $1 billion a year, if losing $10 million is kind of inconsequential, well, then that might be where you draw that line. But losing
That's
$50
about
million,
where we're at, right? It's like
$1
$1
billion
something.
That'd be a
Yeah,
nice problem.
It's close.
Yeah, we can invest in more security then.
There you go.
Well, you built a lot of products this last year, Brett, for our payroll automation and our, employee scorecard system and then Peel Voice, of course. So yeah, I know you've had to take security into consideration with all the stuff that you've built, and you guys have done a great job with that, making sure that everything's buttoned up and secure and that we don't have any, vulnerabilities there. What are some of the things that you went through in that process that you sort of went through to develop those products?
Yeah, a lot of it is making sure that things like your database is accessed only from your web server, and that's done on like a private, LAN, not publicly facing the internet. And on your web server that is publicly facing the internet, you've got, whether you're OAuthing with Google or something, or have a really strict password system to lock it down, making sure you've got, the things in place in between your web server and the world. Things like Cloudflare are super common to sort of deter from DDoS attacks and stuff like that, and load balancers to handle some of that. Honestly, the stuff that the secret sauce in most of the products that we've spun up over the last year happen on the server, or they're leveraging AI. That's a third-party system, but that's being communicated to and from server to server. So it's not going out over a public connection or whatever. So it's the stuff that we've built is pretty basic, I would say, as far as some of the web server and database lockdown stuff that we've had to do. But I would say that one of the bigger things we have to pay attention to is who are we partnering with? If you're working with Anthropic and their Claude system, or OpenAI and their GPT models, or whatever, like, okay, what are they doing with the data you're sending and the data you're getting back from them? Do you have protections and things in place on those agreements that are, contractually obligation for us and them? That's kind of the bigger question mark when we're approaching those systems. Are those secure, and are we contractually in a good place with those systems?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because supply chain is something that I think a lot of people and companies in particular, I think maybe don't fully consider at the level they should. Supply chain is how many things go wrong.
Sure.
There's been multiple significant hacks in the past couple of, 3 years, that have had significant impact because a dependency on a given service or supplier created the compromise. So the supplier gets compromised, and you inherit that compromise, and you don't have controls in place to even determine you've inherited a compromise, because you fully trust that third party. And we can't live without trust. That's the whole thing. Is we exist in an ecosystem where trust is implicit. We have to trust to a degree, but thinking controls. Thinking about, well, do I implicitly trust all of this traffic coming across this API, or should I vet that somehow? Should I analyze that traffic? Those are the kind of those questions you start asking yourself when you look at an ecosystem where you don't have all of it. You own a piece of it, and something else feeds in.
Well, and even if it's not a third-party service, but if you're like leveraging some open source code or something, right?
That's
you
huge.
have to make sure you know what you're getting into. And
there's a term called software composition analysis, SCA, and SCA is a big part of what we suggest people get into and find tools to do or do their own in some way. Is that when you start taking, you're building a Kubernetes cluster and you're taking all these images off a Docker Hub.
Sure.
All right. Well, have you vetted those images to determine what's in them? You know, what are there backdoors built in? You don't know until you've really analyzed that deeply. And so there's services that do that, tools that do it, but it's all part of that decision matrix. You know, where do I put my money so that I know that I'm getting the kind of controls I need? And you know, third-party relationships, including open source, are a big potential risk, and you got to measure that.
And everybody builds on open source.
Oh yeah,
So,
it's almost impossible to find outside of the military places where there is zero open source.
Yeah.
Because it's just so implicit in everything we do.
Yeah, talking about third parties and vendor management, you know, we've been in an interesting position over the last 15, 16 years where we've worked with a lot of banks and financial institutions, mortgage companies, things like that. And we've seen that vendor management due diligence really expand and get, you know, a lot deeper into like, what are our processes? What is, you know, our encryption levels, you know, all, you know, we go through some of these vendor management questionnaires and they can be very exhaustive, you know, 200 questions or more, wanting to know lots of details around, you know, how we process data, you know, how we secure it, what level of, you know, protection do we have? What are the vulnerabilities potentially that we have? And it's interesting to see that process evolve. There used to be that we didn't get any of those kinds of things. And about probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, we started to see some of these due diligence packages come over, and then they've sort of, you know, everyone has their own unique spin on it. And so they're asking a lot for a lot of the same things, but they can all be sort of positioned just a little bit differently, or they're looking at things differently. Have you seen anything with the vendor management process? I know you advised us on those early on when we were starting to really see these real technical ones. What are some things that you've seen in the vendor management side?
So I think one of the things that's coming out is that a lot of companies are saying we need insurance to cover cyber risk. And implicit in the insurance is an inherited form from the insurance company that says you need to get all this data from everyone you're associated with, or we're not going to insure you. And so that has spawned a propagation of this because cyber insurance has become a thing. Now, I have my own opinions on cyber insurance, and you know, one of those is that they're starting to become much more aggressive about mandating a certain level of performance out of you, the insured, or they won't cover. And so, you know, that signing on the dotted line tends to mean that you've done all of this third-party vetting, that you've controlled for areas or moved off of people who don't meet that compliance requirement. And it goes even beyond having a SOC 2 Type 2 or something like that. These are getting even deeper than that. You know, a SOC 2 Type 2 is that fundamental, you have controls in place, you exercise those controls, and they're auditable. And that's really what the SOC 2 comes down to. But these questionnaires, like you said, they can be 200 questions deep, and they go into just a whole lot of real specific questions. And we're going to see more and more of that because the insurance companies are tightening their belts. And they're saying, we're not going to cover you unless all these things are actually verified. Not just signed off, but verified. And they want artifacts for those. And those artifacts have to come from your third party that says, you know, because they filled out the form that you sent to them, and they said, yes, I have encryption. Well, validate that. How do you verify that? And what type of encryption? You know, is it volume encryption on a drive, and so anytime that drive is accessed, it's open and all that data is clear text? Or is it field level encryption, and so only when that field is accessed is that particular data element open? So these are the questions I'm starting to see on these forms.
I can't think of someone who would be more verbose than an insurance company's lawyer. So that just seems like
they're good at it.
The top-notch lawyer
they're good at it.
They're going to throw paper at you like nobody's business.
And so I that's where I'm seeing a lot of this evolution, is this idea that there's attorneys back there saying, we want to cover our butts as an insurance company, so we're going to do this. And that has a downstream effect. Even companies that aren't necessarily doing it for their cyber insurance, they're doing it now because they're seeing these forms and saying, well, that's a good idea.
Well, I know with Squeeze, you know, security's been on our radar for quite a while, and it's, you know, this has sort of been at the forefront of, you know, helping us level up our security posture and everything. And you've been instrumental in that, Vince, with your team at Digital Defense. And we, you know, we're always looking for ways that we can improve our security and make sure that we're able to deliver those artifacts that they need when they ask for it. And, it's just been an interesting thing. A lot of companies aren't really positioned in that, realm. And that's, we've never had an issue passing security checks with potential clients and their vendor management teams. And so we're going to continue to evolve that, and continue to invest in that. So
I think there's a huge value in creating a culture. And I think you guys have done that. You've got just kind of, hey, this is what we do. It's the culture of the company is that when we do things, we do it in a way that is fundamentally secure. Because the reality is we had this conversation before we started recording about 0 days. And then there's a Netflix show apparently called 0 Day. Haven't seen it. But
I saw that with De Niro.
Yeah. So 0 days are kind of the Hollywood of cyber. Right, so it's the cool thing. It's developed by some dark shop in Israel or in Russia or here in the U.S. and only a few people have access to this because it's a 0 day. We found something no one else knows about, and so we're going to leverage that and we're going to use it in a way that benefits us. So whoever we are, well, the number of attacks that are actually successful that use 0 days is less than 1%. Because so many opportunities exist without 0 days. Why would you blow a 0 day when you can use a 12-year-old attack and it's successful? And it's because people don't have a culture of security. Mm-hmm. They don't look at it and go, well, hey, that Windows 2000 box sitting over in the closet that's still running a workload, maybe we ought to update that. Yeah. And change up to something modern that can be patched, because Windows 2000 went out of service, 10 years ago. But there's still people operating like that. And that's why the cybercriminals, they don't have to work that hard. Mm-hmm. They can find vulnerabilities that are out there.
Well, I remember I had a security class when I was doing my master's degree at BYU, and they taught us about Metasploit.
Sure, best tool ever.
It's an amazing tool, but a high schooler can use it. It's not difficult. And you load it up, you point it at a machine and you hit a button and it says, here's all the vulnerabilities.
Here's all the exploits that we have prepackaged to run against that vulnerability.
What do you want to do? Do you want to get a shell access to that server? Sure, hit this button. It's super simple. Yeah.
That
scared the crap out of me. It's like someone going into technology holy crap, this is available to anybody and it's free and
there's the paid version, which is far more robust. But there's still the free version. Yeah. You can pwn that 12-year-old box with the free version, no problem. And that's why it's hard for me as a security practitioner is when I talk to companies that are just so resistant. I'm like, man, the bar's so low. Yeah. It is so low. Just meet this, and you're going to be so much better off.
Yeah. I remember 10 years ago, someone told me I think one of the guys that was working with us, he said, if you just make sure the doors are closed, you don't even have to lock them.
You're going to miss, you're going to dodge 90%.
Closed. Yeah. And so.
I mean, if somebody gets up their bridges and you're their target, it's a hard thing to defend against because then your focus. Mm-hmm. They're all on you. And particularly if they're skilled, they're probably going to find a way in. Yeah. But that's where robustness comes up, right? Resiliency. Yeah. It's that, all right, so we did get hit, but we can come back fast because we built resiliency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Interesting. Any other, you mentioned your book. What's the title of your book?
So it's How to Not Suck at Cybersecurity.
Okay.
Oh, that's a good title. That's a good title. I like that.
And I broke it into 4 personas. Uh-huh. So the individual, you've got a laptop and a cell phone. Well, I break down why that's not just all you have. You probably live in a house and you probably have a Wi-Fi router and you probably have a smart toaster for all I know, but whatever, you've got stuff. And it's learning how to operate in that ecosystem securely. And then the guy with the side hustle. So you got, maybe a lady selling jewelry on Etsy or whatever. Well, that's an expanded threat surface. So how should you deal with that? And this is very prescriptive. I got tired of reading books that were restatements of regulations you should go read. Well, Carson, you're not going to go read a regulation. And if you did, you would go, so what? What does it mean to me, right? I created this to be very prescriptive. So the mid-cap manager, is the next persona. And then the final persona is the enterprise CEO. And I wrote it so that you just went through that individual down to enterprise CEO, so that in that stack, if you're the enterprise CEO, you should read all of it because you're an individual. You probably need to know what side hustlers have to worry about. You certainly went through mid-cap and now you're an enterprise CEO. All of that prescriptive stuff in each of the chapters is laid out. Just do these things. Ask these questions. Because you've got a team now. So you got to ask Brett. Brett, what about this? And he's got to answer that. But asking the right questions is half the battle of being a CEO of a company.
That's great. I can't wait to check it out. I can't think of a better person to write that to, just because you're so knowledgeable on the cybersecurity topic and everything. And so, when's it going to be out?
So we expect to publish in August.
Okay.
So finished manuscript. I'm going through peer review right now. One of the things of being a cyber guy, you don't want to release something without having your peers look at it and say, Vince, you're totally off here. Thank you. You just want to make sure that there's a level of consensus that you're saying the right things in the right places to the right people. And I've got great feedback from my partners, Craig and Paul, but from other people in the industry, come back and give me good feedback. But like I said, it's now at that point where we're working with the publisher on how to typeset, what the cover is going to look like, all that stuff, and then hopefully by August it'll be out.
That's great.
I'm bummed you didn't let slip some stuff from your Air Force days in there. You told us you were sort of whitewashing.
Yeah, I'm whitewashing some stuff, and I'll tell you the first story that we open up with is it's and I try to tell it in kind of a way that hooks you a little bit, but we got what we call on station and given our target, and that target was a chemical plant. And it was strategic, provided strategic supplies, and needed to be shut down. And so it's the process of how we went through and shut down that thing. And it's in the context of CIS Top 18, which is the Center for Internet Security, CIS, built the top 18 controls you should be considering as a company. Well, when I really thought about that, every one of those controls applies at the individual, at the side hustler level, at the mid-cap level, and the CEO of an enterprise level. It applies. It's how does it apply? And so that's each chapter kind of goes into those controls, what you should be doing on that part. And that first story talks about, we found a box that was completely neglected. It happened to be a Windows Server 2000 box. And
there you go.
It was sitting there just running, not doing a dang thing. So somebody had used it for something.
And then
but
sit
it was
there.
Just sitting there running. Yeah. And so that became where we launched, dropped our shell, did all our port spanning and sniffing, figured out what the IoT ecosystem looked like, found the HIM, the human interface machine, and did everything we needed to do at that point.
That's awesome.
So
from an undisclosed location, right?
Yes.
Yeah, of course. It's too bad. I was hoping to get some state secrets out on the podcast. But
sorry about that.
Okay.
Did you get the chemical plant shut down?
So we were successful in our operation. Yeah.
There you
That's
go.
great. I love it.
That's good speak. That's good.
I see the makings of a movie here. Who's going to play?
Sell the rights.
Who's going to play Vince?
Yeah, it's definitely somebody
Vince Vaughn.
as bald and ugly as I am.
Vince Vaughn.
Yeah, there you go. He has hair. He doesn't
First
count.
name. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Vince, it's been a pleasure to have you here today
It's fun to be here
on the
guys.
podcast.
I always enjoy our conversations.
Yeah, it's this is something that is continually evolving. It's so relevant to many of our clients and those that are watching our podcast. So it's been great conversation and great to hear about your book and everything. And look forward to checking that out here soon.
Appreciate it.
Do you have any parting thoughts about cybersecurity, Brett?
No, I just stay vigilant and
Indeed.
stay on top of the new stuff, and that's the best you can do. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, you've been watching the Juice Consumer Direct Podcast. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure you check us out, like and subscribe, and drop us a comment if you have a question. Thanks.